Welcome to the Meat Bags Podcast, a time where we get to sit down with casual conversations with friends to talk about all aspects of traditional skills, from business to meat processing, from conservation to physical training, and any rabbit trails that we might find in between. Right now we are filming introductions for the podcast that we had filmed months prior. So right now we are sitting exactly where we filmed all of these podcasts, but we are changing it. The stage is changed and we are framing it in, and we are going to create a new room and office space. This first podcast is with two very close friends of mine and also two business owners and theologians, Spencer and Sawyer. In this episode, we talk about our first hunting experiences and the traditional skill of theology and how it plays into our lives as hunters and sportsmen. Let me give a quick introduction for my first two guests on the show, Sawyer and Spencer. Sawyer might need no introduction, but is my hunting partner and lifelong friend. You will find him in multiple videos on all of our social media platforms and is a true asset and friend. Whether in the field hunting or at home raising children, he is a man you can count on. Spencer, on the other hand, is a man that I have just as much admiration and respect for. He is a self-taught theologian and very respected in the study of God and His Word. He is a business owner of Redmond Munitions out of Montana, father, husband, and friend. But without any further ado, welcome to the first episode of the Meat Bags Podcast, where we are much more than just bags of meat. So this morning we invited Spencer to come out and chat with us for a little bit to hear kind of his first hunting stories, what he has as far as exposure to hunting and that traditional skill, and what that means to him as a Christian. What is your first exposure or memory hunting, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This will be fun, I'm sure.
For sure.
So probably my first experience hunting, I was working construction. I was 16, 17 years old, something like that. And one of the guys that I was doing construction with, he was a good old boy from a more rural part of California. Those do exist,
Yeah.
And we just don't have any voting power.
Yeah.
So we were out quail hunting. So we took our shotguns out into the middle of nowhere, California, and funny thing is, quail, they look really dumb when they're on the ground just walking with their little bobber in front of them. Mm-hmm. They fly pretty damn fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they.
I've never hunted quail. Have you, Soy?
No, there's no quail in Montana, so yeah.
Yeah, they have them over in Washington, but anyways.
Yeah. So it was a.
Hunt's is closest thing for sure.
No, you're fine. Yeah, so it was a good trip. We ended up, my buddy that I was going with, he was the more experienced hunter. He dropped 3 quail that day, but the big takeaway from that trip was we were out walking and a rattlesnake got close to us and started shaking his rattle. And so we decapitated it with our shotguns, and we decided we were going to make a belt out of it when we got back to the to the house. Well, so we take the body of the snake and we put it into a couple of brown paper bags because that's just what we had on hand for that. And about 30 minutes later, we're walking on the trail, and my buddy was about 6'6", built like a linebacker, close to 300 pounds, big old boy. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, he starts shrieking and jumping like you wouldn't believe. And I'm spooked at first, thinking, what's in front of him? Turns out the snake had wriggled enough in the brown paper bag. It started poking him in the back.
Oh, yeah, that freaked me out.
Yeah, sure. It freaked him out pretty good before we initially realized what it was. And like 2 hours later, we stop. We have lunch at, whatever time. And the backpack is over across the way. And we can hear the stupid thing still moving because, snakes, even if they're headless, they keep going for a good long while.
Yeah.
So probably for quail hunting being my first time going hunting, the snake made a far bigger impression upon me.
Than the quail did.
Yeah, we ended up taking the skin and making a band for a hat.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
That is pretty sweet. That's a good story.
So you didn't eat the rattlesnake?
I didn't eat the rattlesnake, no.
You missed out from what I hear.
I've heard it's good too,
Yeah.
It's just all white meat.
Is it?
Yeah, just all white meat and no bones. So.
Well, I think it has rib bones all down the whole body, but Apparently, it's pretty good. You just cook them up.
Opportunity missed.
But, and then also, what did you do with the head after you? Well, you shot it off. Never mind. There's probably nothing left.
There was nothing left of
Oh,
that
okay.
head,
Yeah. Because their head, they'll still bite you when their head's just there.
What's your first memory? Kind of a little bit of a comparison from somebody who grew up in California to somebody who grew up in Montana. It's it's just a little bit of a comparison, something a little different.
Pretty redneck style of hunting that we grew up kind of partaking in. I did have a good hunting influence my real young years of life. Just my dad would take me out hunting. But then, so my first hunt per se, was in Montana. Your first age, it used to be you had to be 12. I'm pretty sure to hunt.
Yep.
Now there's like youth programs for like 10 and up or something to a certain age.
They used to have the pheasant one when we were little.
But so my first hunt, I took hunter safety and I was 12, like 5th or 6th grade or 4th grade or something, maybe 5th grade, I don't know. Anyhow, I did mine in Hinsdale.
Oh, you did?
Hinsdale, Montana. It's like 400 or 800 people. Anyway, real small town. But took hunter safety. My stepdad, my parents split up long before that. And then when I was 12, went out and shot my first buck. It was the first time I'd ever killed anything other than gophers and rabbits. But pulled up above on this gravel road, a county road. Totally illegal to shoot from the road even. We roll up in my stepdad's F-250, reel the window down, and just start blasting at this mule deer buck. And I had buck fever, and it just was a bad experience. He was hollering at me to shoot, and so I gut shot this thing, and it ran forever. And we chased it, and I remember chasing it, shooting out of the window of our F-250. And I'm 12, first buck I had ever hunted, and I put a box of shells into that deer, and it still didn't die, and we lost it. And I got to skip school because of this. But I remember it was just like the worst first buck experience. So we go back out the next day to find this buck, and we search. It's just a big ranch property, and we search and search. And we, towards the end of the day, we finally find it, and it's still alive. Just oozing green stuff out of its belly, just breathing hard, just rotten. Poor little mule deer. But found that thing, and I put another 3 shells into it. Just demolished it. But that was my first buck experience. It was
no
awful.
Rattlesnakes?
No rattlesnakes. No, it was far too cold for that. Let's hear yours.
Hear mine? My first hunting story. Well, my first here, actually. I've killed animals before this, same as you. I've even shot birds before I was technically supposed to, but this is the first deer I ever shot. I was with Rocky. I guess I won't say last names, but I was with him, and we were way up somewhere. I don't even want to say that, I guess. We were way up north. And snow was up past the wheel wells in the pickup, and we had about 3 or 4 pickups deep, and that's how we hunted. And we just drove around and pulled each other out and drove around and pulled each other out. And this deer came up, and shot him one shot. Got out. They made me take a bite of its liver, and this was my first hunting story.
Did you
So
also shoot it from the pickup?
shot it right out of the front window. Yep.
It was weird to not do that growing up.
It was a little bit. It's very different now. To have stewardship or to have regard for the animals, to have regard for the land, going into regenerative agriculture, things like that, kind of puts a label on you, whether you're a Christian or not, of just being more liberal-minded. And I'd like to break into that and just kind of knock down the walls to that is absolutely not true whatsoever. That conservative Christians should have that mixture. That there is a sense, that there's an obligation, that there's a conviction put upon us as Christians from the Holy Spirit to have good stewardship of the land, to see things perform, to subdue it, to have it under our foot, all of the animals. And that is not a negative connotation to have them underfoot. That is to have all regard and kindness and love and patience and all of the gifts of the Spirit tied into how we steward those animals and how we steward that land. So I think it's very interesting that for us as Christians, my wife and I specifically, we've kind of ran into that of, wanting to do more regenerative agriculture, wanting to just be good stewards of what the Lord has given us in his creation, and how putting that stuff out on social media, we get a lot of backlash from conservative Christians. Conservative Christians give us, so-called conservative Christians, I'll even give the air quotes in there, so-called conservative Christians who don't necessarily agree with that, or they just don't maybe fully understand it. Maybe it's ignorance is bliss. They just correlate you wanting to be a good steward, or to, God bless you, to be a good steward, to take care of the land in certain ways is just kind of what hippies do. It's not necessarily what conservative Christians do a lot of the times. And yeah, as hunters especially, that's kind of the area we're talking about now, that is extremely important to us. I think that is something worth talking about. We specifically brought Spencer on because Spencer is very knowledgeable in theology and the study of God. And this is the kind of conversation that this is going to be about is how does it correlate with being a Christian? How should we do this biblically? Should we care enough? Is there a point where you're caring too much, where you're starting to now worship the creation and not the creator? So there are these boundaries, there are these points to where, to where they muddle. So it's kind of a confusing realm. Maybe this is just confusing for me. I don't know if you guys have ran into this at all, or kind of wrestled with this also. There's a book that I've read that kind of brought a lot of this to me. Me and him aren't necessarily theologically connected, but Joe Salatin has a great book, and it's called The Pigness of the Pig. And it talks all about, basically they call him the crazy hippie Christian. So he kind of has this concept of as well, that God has given us these things to steward and care for well, and that we must have the pigness of the pig. So giving that the option for the pig to be a pig, not be raised in tight confinement and no space and on cement floors. Not necessarily, that's not very piggy of a pig, if that makes sense to you guys. Mm-hmm. So that's a book people can check out. I highly recommend. It's kind of what got me onto this topic and wanting to discuss this as well, and to bring Spencer and Sawyer both to kind of get other viewpoints into this. Anything that you guys, with my rambling here, that kind of sticks out with that at all? Anything you got to say?
Well, before we even get into the subject matter, just as a really quick aside note, when people want to tell you that you're wrong or misunderstanding or doing something incorrectly on the internet, I don't automatically assume that that's a real person. I don't mean to say that they're a bot or an AI.
Or just a bag of meat.
Or a bag of meat. People on the internet will say things, and the filter that you and I have when we communicate in person, I'm becoming increasingly more convinced that that filter does not even begin to engage when people start typing away at their computer. So as far as people telling you that what you guys are doing out here is wrong or misguided, I would not give that the time of day, because those people, again, presuming the best to the best of our ability, but also being realistic, let us assume that they either live in a city, they probably don't do any sort of conservationism whatsoever. And so if they presume to tell you that the way that you're doing conservationism is wrong, from the conservationists that I know, they would never say that to another conservationist. They might offer helpful advice about how to do something better, but they would never go out of their way to tell you you're doing it wrong, you're screwing it up, you're misrepresenting, whatever it might be. It's there's much more camaraderie among the conservationists and the regenerative agricultural types that I know, to where it's much more build you up, build me up, let us work together, community building, rather than simply tearing you down because we think you're doing it wrong. Yeah. I mean, that's such a useless statement to tell someone that they're doing it wrong. So that's why you got skepticism when it comes to the internet.
Yeah,
eternally.
Absolutely, absolutely for everything.
I got some thoughts on that as well. that was a good segue into the thought that I just had while you were saying that. Is that person who is saying we're doing it wrong, or those people that are saying, like, you even do it at all. You go out and just kill animals? How is that? Okay. And how is that biblical? Like, I don't have any scripture references at the moment, but something to think about, like an animal's life as well. Like a full animal's life, like a deer. It lives, it breeds, it spreads its generation, just like everything, of course. But but the disease they face, the end of their life, is awful. Mm-hmm. So there is also, just to correct that person that says that you're even doing it, like what? Like, you're doing that animal or that species a huge service, a mercy. You are. I mean, in regards to your farm animals, the same thing. Like what? They get old and they die of some sickness, or they feel awful, I'm sure, if you let them live to that point. The way we would harvest our animals is to kill them instantly if you can. And to not do it out of, like, I don't know, to do it in the right way would be to, like, just do it without feeling bad about it, I guess. and you shouldn't feel bad about it. There's nothing wrong with it, I don't think. But
Well, also in the state of Montana, especially being an easy example of this, we're talking a lot about, hunting animals for meat, for pelts, etc. And maybe we don't want to get into this today. That's your decision. But there's the wolf population in Montana. And maybe we don't have enough time for that one. But there's very good reasons to decimate the wolf population in Montana for the sake of the deer and elk population in Montana, which is what, 70% or 70% of the deer and elk population has been genocided because of the introduction of wolves into Montana. That was started back during, Roosevelt?
No. They reintroduced in like the 90s, I think, or 80s.
Oh, I'm
in
way
other
off.
places too in America, not just Montana. Like,
yeah,
but
they're about to do it in Washington.
So they do that in thought of mitigating the herds to keep them died down. Like, even a death to a bullet compared to, like, getting ripped apart by a wolf. Oh, so like, I'd rather get shot. But anyhow,
absolutely, even in the gut.
So yeah,
gonna try to find you.
And this could just segue also into the propaganda of the liberals are the ones doing that, letting in the, like, keeping the wolves protected and this and that. But what they're doing to other animals is crazy. So pretty hypocritical.
Yeah, very hypocritical for sure. I think a lot of that stems from ignorance as well, and just lack of understanding, lack of living here. It's the same with the grizzly population you kind of touched on. It's like we live with them. We go up, we have to deal with them. We're the ones that I have to deal with them, with my animals, my livestock, with hunting, with my children. I face that every day. It's the same as the riots and stuff for people in the city. That's, you can probably you can talk into that area a lot more than I can. Trying to use other animals as a conservation tool is very hard because they're animals, right? They migrate, they move, seasons, the weather affects them, all of this, versus having hunters where it's very regulated. How many animals are being taken off. The majority of them are all clean kills. With wolves, you're trying to introduce that. You don't have those numbers. You don't get those numbers. You don't know how many they're actually taking.
Right.
I mean, most people don't even see wolves. Nonetheless, you can count how many they kill.
They wipe out herds of elk.
I mean, so get into a little bit of that. They train their pups to hunt. They do that by killing and going out and not even necessarily eating after they kill. They kill to kill because it is a training tool, and that's how they're created, and that's how they're supposed to do things. So having other hunters hunt wolves is, I think, a very crucial thing. It's very important. That kind of ties in a little bit to almost the meshing of the beliefs that you were kind of talking about. You have, or one of you were talking about, you have the very liberal-sided, and then you have the very conservative-sided and they can kind of find a middle ground in there with conservation, and should be able to find a middle ground there in with conservation. It's hard when more of a left-siding belief system is that you can just let it be and it will regulate itself. If humans just don't come into contact with it, then it'll be fine and it will mitigate itself and they will sustain their populations. It's absolutely not true whatsoever. We have highways, we have fences, we have railroads, we have bridges. We have all this stuff that has completely stopped the migration patterns of these animals being able to self-regulate themselves. So humans are here, we're here to stay. So how can we also keep the animals here, and how can we make sure that they stay? And that's where conservatives and the liberal-sided could come together in finding a middle ground and understanding that hunting is extremely necessary and that it helps with the conservation of these animals. I feel like we're getting a little off topic here. We were kind of discussing and talking about what? I don't know. I forgot already.
What we're talking about. I mean, you mentioned like kind of backing up biblically, like living this lifestyle of like harvesting, hunting, and
Oh yeah,
provision in this. Maybe I don't know.
yeah,
Something like that.
yeah. It was kind of the meshing of the two, but
Well, something that you touched on several times here, and I think it really we could talk and expose it a little bit more here, is this idea that there should be and there can be a middle ground between conservationism, between a, let us call them, a more left-leaning individual
Yep.
and a right-leaning conservative individual. And I believe that's absolutely true. But we also need to keep in mind what's going on behind the scenes when we all talk about why we think that this is good, true, and beautiful or important. And so we live in God's world. And there are things that are hardwired into us as humans, but also into nature, that you cannot get away from. And so humans are hardwired to be stewards, to be stewardly minded. And the difference between, I would suggest, the difference between someone who's more leftist minded versus conservatively minded in this area is that the conservative has a much better grasp about why it is important to conserve. Why does conservation matter? What are we trying to conserve? Whereas someone who does not necessarily claim the title of conservative or conservationism, what have you, they can still justify the position, but they have to go through a couple extra hoops and hurdles to get to that point. Even if somebody, might be a red-blooded conservative American, but they haven't been in church in 30 years, they still, by and large, broad brushstrokes here for a second, by and large, they still understand God made this land. We are here to preserve, maintain, and subdue.
see, and I kind of feel like, honestly, that I don't necessarily agree with that. Because
Okay.
I really think that there are a lot of conservatives out there, and they're maybe just more of a hardcore blanket statement. I mean, they would call themselves Christians or conservatives, which is obviously a totally another topic to talk about Americans thinking they're Christians or not. But with that comes a lot of, I don't know how else to say this, I guess oil rig people, kind of that really destroy the land, but we're conservative Christians. But yeah, just, hardcore Trump supporter, just.
They're biting the cheese, though. They're the other end that's biting that cheese.
Yeah. And this is obviously extreme end of things and kind of a blanket statement, but I really feel like I think it gives that look to a lot of people, especially on the left, of these conservative Christians, that shouldn't you, a lot of them would say to them, shouldn't you guys try to be taking better care of the land? Like, didn't God create this? Aren't you supposed to believe that? And they're not necessarily doing that, or they don't want to acknowledge that there is another new, better way because it was introduced by a leftist ideology. So they basically just cut it down. It's kind of with the what I was talking about earlier with the regenerative agriculture. It's like I know a lot of guys that are conservative, hardcore Republicans that will absolutely never move away from monocropping all of their fields. They will absolutely plant soy and wheat until they die, and they will continue injecting fertilizer into the soil and doing it. Is that the best way to steward the land? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, but obviously where we stand, I feel like we're pretty clear where we believe in that. But, you know, it's so, yeah, so I guess just kind of almost to disagree is that I really think that there's a lot of conservative Christians out there that kind of just use that title for their own abuse or their own gain. Would you agree?
I would agree with the claim, and I would agree with the statement, absolutely. But if we're gonna be fair for a second here, on the flip side of that as well, you know, there are conservatively minded folk who would fit into the category that I described, and there are ones that would fit into the category that you've described. But you could do the exact same thing with the quote leftist type, where let's draw hyperbole for a second here. You have the hippie leftist who, you know, who takes conservationism very, very seriously, but then you have somebody who lives in the city, buys all of their product from inhumane means at a grocery store. They don't source any of their items that they talk about. They talk a lot about conservationism, but then they drive an electric vehicle that has a lithium-ion battery in it.
Yep.
And the damage that can cause. So I think that there's room in the conversation to acknowledge that there are camps, even within these broad categories of liberal versus conservative, conservationism, what have you, where there's room enough to say, yes, those people absolutely do exist. They are representatives of the position, but they're not the only representatives of that position. So the devil's in the details. That's where it does get really murky. Yep. And, you know, when you're shooting at these large targets here, you're going to hit a lot of different groups of people.
For sure.
And to acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, both sides need to reform. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I agree. Both sides need to reform. That's what Soy said, which we agree with. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So how does that? So so as Christians, as believers, we believe that hunting is a good thing. We've all had our first experiences hunting. We want to get Spencer on some big game, hopefully soon. Maybe tonight even. It is rifle season. We could tonight, next year, sometime soon, we're going to get him into that, get him addicted as well.
Well, we tried to go bear hunting last spring, but you guys got one about 2 hours before I got here.
Yeah, we both got one, actually. Kind of crazy. Yeah. Haven't seen a bear since.
I did help you pack out.
Yeah.
It's basically the real experience.
Yeah, it was. Got there just in time.
To work. Get wet and work.
That was still a really fun day, even though you didn't get out with us.
Yeah, it was a good day.
I mean, it was also probably one of the easiest pack outs I could have ever asked for.
That was really nice.
That was fun.
Yeah. So...
This time I have my tags, for sure.
You had them last time.
I did, but then I thought...
We just had to find them.
that was crazy. Yeah.
So, with talking about conservation hunting, being Christians, where do we go with this next? Oh man, I wish we could have some questions about...
Why other than conserving, what else? Other than being conservative and maintaining the earth, I guess, or whatever the word was. Stewarding the land, subduing it. Why else would we do it? Other than, food, obviously. Food, eating. Like, I hunt because I need food. And it's also okay to enjoy it, I would say.
Yeah.
Like enjoying the kill.
Yeah.
Not in a weird way.
Hunt, enjoying the kill.
Well, something that Marcus brought up in the intro is that it's so common and easy for us to be simply reduced to the physical. And I'm going to try to be very, very careful in how I say this, because this could get squirrely real easy. But nature is transcendental. Nature is more than just the physical trees around you.
Yes.
Now, if you've talked with a lot of hunters, and I know that you both have, and you encourage them to come to church, let's say, or you encourage them about your faith, and you want them to be a part of that, more often than not, the answer I've heard from many a hunter has been, I feel closest to
Yes.
God when I'm out in
yeah.
nature, not when I'm in a building.
That is my church when I'm out there.
Precisely, exactly. Now, this is where they're really, really close, because nature is absolutely transcendental in that you are absolutely communing with God through his creation in a very, very real, organic way, where you are fulfilling, if you're hunting and you're out there in the sticks, you are fulfilling a hardwired need in yourself to be out there and to hunt and to pursue and to claim and subjugate. And you are doing the dance of death with these animals that are, if you're doing it right, they're never aware of you. But realistically, they'll catch a scent, you'll break a tree branch, what have you.
True.
And so you're in the middle of doing this beautiful dance of death with these animals out here, just as we were intended to do in God's arena.
Yeah.
And so the challenge is to make sure that we don't mistake the creation for the creator.
That's right.
Because we absolutely have to draw that distinction. And that's kind of how I've led those conversations now as I've gotten better at this through the years, of talking with these hunters to where, it's no longer, no, you're wrong, nature isn't God, or God isn't out there in nature. That's the wrong way to go about that conversation. It's, hey man, you are absolutely communing with God in nature, but you are mistaking a theological term. I try to not use these too often here, but it's going to happen now. You are mistaking what I would call natural revelation versus special revelation.
Yeah.
And the problem is that natural revelation is good. However, if you do not have that special revelation, if the Spirit of God is not illuminating your spiritual eyes, you're going to get squirrely on natural revelation very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And this is a reformed understanding of epistemology, forgive the $5 word, how we know things, versus how a Roman Catholic has a different understanding of natural theology than how a Reformed Christian would.
Yeah. And, going out in nature, I can serve God real well, being out there hunting, just doing that in prayer and in thought of God the whole time and enjoy it. But that nature is not the house of God. There's not community out there when you're out there alone. You're serving your family by bringing home meat, but you're not meeting at the house of God with the bride of Christ. So.
Absolutely. And we are called to not forsake the assembly of the saints.
Yes, exactly. So.
And
it's not your church.
Precisely. And as much as we love being outdoors, you know what? Nothing will sanctify you or get you on the road of sanctification more than being with other Christians, even if you don't necessarily like them.
Yep.
That's part of the sanctification process. It's really, really hard to grow in sanctification if you're out in the sticks and you're not talking to nobody, because the opportunity for sinning against a fellow image bearer is virtually non-existent.
Yep. And then, just to add to that, meeting with other believers, another reason why it's so good. And Joe Carlson from Bayview Bible Church up in Idaho, I've done a podcast with him. Shout out to Joel. Why are you so gay? Shout out to Joel. But he told me years ago, gathering with the saints to one another are conduits of grace. We are conduits of grace to one another, and God uses each other to extend that grace to one another. So when you are forsaking meeting together and not having a body that you are committed to, even on opening Sunday, that can damage you and your family and your children. And I think that is very good clarification to bring up. It's very important as hunters because we are dedicated to this. We want to be good at it. We want to be successful.
Skip church for it.
And we've done it. I've done it. Sawyer's done it. We've done it. But speaking from first-hand experience, don't do it at least as much as possible.
I did yesterday.
There's nothing wrong with it either, but you making habits of it and making it a consistent thing that you miss every year, or you miss the whole month of September, that's not good. It's not a good thing. You probably won't even be you probably won't necessarily even be successful hunting. Who knows? But
Story of my life.
give the time to God.
Every once in a while.
give your time to God, give the hunt to God. I think that can also lead into another question I have for both of you, for Spencer as well, but are there Christian, how do I word this? So there are different ceremonies that happen in different parts of the world and different cultures and different religions before a big hunt happens. Everybody knows of, Native American traditions and the big, blessings and parties, I say, powwows, not necessarily even a powwow. What do you call it? I don't know. Anyways, they're hootenannies before they went out. They're get-togethers. They're unrelated to Christ fellowship with one another before their hunts is something that I think a lot of hunters in general like to look at. We like to look. I do personally. I guess I'm speaking out of personal. I really like Native American culture. I really like a way that they did a lot of hunting. I think a lot of that is really phenomenal. I think there's a lot we can learn from that as Christians as well.
Excellent stewards.
Excellent stewards of the land. Just
worship Nephilim, though. What the frick?
Yeah, Nephilim. That's another podcast we might get into.
Yeah.
Talking.
Nephilim, man, dude.
So, I'm curious. I can't really think of anything or don't really necessarily know of anything. How can Christians dedicate that time? What's a good way that we could dedicate that time to God, always being in prayer, being grateful and thankful, of course, praying without ceasing? And that's something that comes to mind that we could do while we're hunting, to give this hunt to God, to give that time to Him, make sure that He's being honored and glorified through it. But do we have any traditions? Do Christians have any traditions before the hunt? A prayer?
So historically, there was an old saint for Roman Catholicism, and I'm blanking on his name right now. But there was a whole, not just a prayer, but there was, if memory serves, a ceremony or ritual, however you want to describe it, that he would do or he would tell people to do prior to the hunt. That was essentially giving the hunt to God, acknowledging He is the one that describes all this. Yeah, I wish I could remember his name. I was trying to look it up, but I try not to have my phone on me too often when I'm doing things like this. The other, because I can't think of the gentleman's name, there is also a long-standing tradition in Christianity to where we take existing pagan practices, pagan rituals, and we refine them. It's the same thing that Christianity throughout time has done with most societies that have not been tainted by the Nephilim. We have a different tradition when it comes to those societies, but we don't have time for that one. But Christianity has looked at pagan cultures, and they have pointed out, you understand so much of God, but this is where you have missed it. Let us refine and make proper and pure much of what you already know. And so we can take existing traditions from the natives and other such groups of people and say, you guys get this, this, and this so good, so right, and here's how we can make it glorious to God.
That's really good. That is, okay, so to squash some stereotypes, Christians go into third world countries and make everybody dress up in blue jeans and button-up shirts. So that is a stereotype of Christian missionaries around the world over the last 80 years. That's kind of the stereotype that's been pushed. Christians come in, destroy the culture of the people who exist there, bring in their Christian culture, create a new culture.
That's
but
not reforming.
That's not necessarily reforming, or that is not reforming. that is completely changing. But you can reform them. So how does that look? What are those different things? I know when I was in India doing missions, we were in Varanasi, and we sat down with Hindus, and the way that we were able to interact more freely with them was adopting different techniques that the Hindus did that were not worshiping of other gods, but that could be pointed towards Christ. And that's what we did. We channeled those to be honoring and glorifying to God, to be in communion with God. And they were relevant. That's really iffy to be on also. Being relevant's not always necessarily the best thing to do.
No, but what you mean by relevant, talking with Indians
Yes.
in the country of India, is not what a Westerner living in
Montana.
Portland, Oregon
Yeah.
means. The word relevant can actually have multiple intentions or connotations depending on what culture. I think you're safe using the word.
Yes,
I think we
okay.
understand enough to know
Yes.
what you mean and don't mean by the word.
It was an opportunity, it was a segue to meet them in their culture and to say, hey, your guys' culture is not just completely dirty and filthy and nasty. It needs to be gone and destroyed and bulldozed. That's not the point. It can be reformed. It can be channeled to worship God.
Or brought back. A lot of these cultures
very good. Yep.
are God-given cultures. They're descended from Christians or I don't know, like ancient Jews who worship God. But yeah, a lot of these pagan traditions, they stem from a godly way of life, and they tried to pervert it. I think we just need to bring it back. Like you look at Halloween, that's considered a pagan holiday. But if you go back to the early church, I'm pretty sure it's a Christian holiday. It's
All Hallows Eve.
All Hallows Eve, remembering the saints dead in Christ. Even to the point of dressing up like evil. It was to make the point that they're not afraid of the fallen angels or demons no longer. It's to mock them. That's where that comes from. So.
Well, and even before All Hallows Eve, there was an old pagan tradition called Samhain, which was the beginning of the hunter season, if I remember correctly.
Samhain is
Samhain,
another
thank you.
pronunciation of that. But yeah.
Samhain.
Yes.
So
But
Samhain, is that
You
a
probably
way
said
that
it.
we can start hunting season? Is that a...
I think that
I
it
don't understand. I don't know what Samhain... I don't know what Samhain is, but how... Is that a... something we do before the 1st of September or 2nd of September, before hunting season?
I would say that if it is not something we have yet purified and made beautiful, we sure can now, and we can learn how to do that better.
Yeah.
So, but then you need to go into learning the history of what the actual practice was and determining to the best of your ability, allowing wisdom to lead you. Can this ritual or can this ceremony be saved and purified and refined, or is this something that we should probably just say Christianity absorbed this, Samhain is gone, became All Hallows Eve, now we're at Halloween, and now we need to purify Halloween again? Or is Samhain in fact something that we are able to see, what do you want to say, the bare bones of it, and say, okay, we can work with this. We can make this proper.
I guess, yeah. I want to hear from all of you guys who are listening, if you are, whether it's on podcast or on video. I want some comments in the bottom of what you Christian sportsmen think, what you guys think is a way where like-minded Christian sportsmen, outdoor enthusiasts, hunters who are believers can gather in the idea of a festival, in honoring and glorifying God in a festival feast before we go out and partake in hunting, which he has, again, given us the opportunity to do. And I'm just very curious about that and what other people might have to say or ideas even.
Well, I think we can also shamelessly borrow an idea that we see just down the road over here right before hunter season every year.
Hunter's Feast.
The Hunter's Feast. They do a big block party.
Yep.
And you know what? What would
Reform
it take
it.
to Christianize that?
Yeah.
I don't know. 4 p.m. psalm singing doesn't need to take an hour.
Oh, that'd be
It can be
sweet.
20 minutes on the block.
Dude.
Whomever is there,
Start it.
boom, easy done.
Might be what it takes. What if we did something
Yeah.
like that through Redmond Ordinance?
Too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Archery before the actual start of the hunting season. I mean, to me, that's the actual start of the hunting season.
Well, and not only that, but it's been a long time. You might have to go back a little bit older than your old Baptist hymnals, because those are at best going to go back to, the 1800s?
Yeah.
If you go back a little bit older to some of those older hymns, there are some that are all about the hunt and the glory of God in nature. And, if those have not yet been translated into English, there's this great little university, college out in Moscow, Idaho, that takes old manuscripts that have never been translated into English, and they get their students to practice their Latin, I believe a couple other languages as well, and translate these manuscripts into English, some of it for the very, very first time.
That's cool.
Because some of those old songs are just good, especially you've got a room full of men just singing. You know, it's nice and low, so I can actually hit those notes as compared to a lot of modern day music. It's powerful, it's moving, it's primal.
Yeah. Priming too, get you pumped.
Absolutely.
One thing I do want to point out though as well, I don't think that we're saying if you're not having some sort of Christian tradition before hunting, that you're in sin or you're not going to get something. But it would be very good to, I think, why not? Why wouldn't you want to have a service for the Lord before going out and doing this, another service for the Lord is what, I mean, that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and with that, meeting and gathering with other believers who are like-minded, even more so, who also like to hunt. I mean, having a gathering where a couple hundred people get together who are all hunters that are getting together to honor and glorify God, to prime themselves before the primal hunt. What a cool just networking opportunity that is. Just to gather.
Save people, hopefully.
What awesome fellowship that would be. I mean, there's a lot of similarities in a group like that. You know, that's a pretty niche group.
That'd be such a cool thing to do.
It would be awesome.
Such a cool, it'd be awesome to start that. Do something.
Absolutely. Well,
Especially
and the
around this
reason and the reason why we would even say, why is it necessary or a good idea to do a festival or a block party or a gathering of whatever size you determine? Why does it matter? That's a fair question to ask. And I would simply answer it by saying, because Christ has been so removed at every area, every stage, every level of society, Christ is Lord over all of it. And as such, he is ever present. We simply choose to acknowledge that in more and more areas. Whether or not we're saying he is doesn't change the reality of him, but rather it directs our minds to recognize the truth that is already there.
Great reminder. That's a great point.
Yeah, that's
Remind you whose ground you're walking on and whose animals you're hunting.
And
Who's
that-
giving them to you.
And that is how we have greater respect for the fellow image bearer as well as for the animals that we're pursuing, because we know the master and the creator of all of it. And we dare not insult him in his creation, in our practice, in our way of life, to the best of our ability. And if that sounds ubiquitous, it's meant to. It's actually meant to be involved in all of your life, in everything that you say and do. And for people who hear that and say, well, that sounds like a lot of work. Work is not bad.
That's right. That's right. It's a good form of work. And that would be one way you could bring your outdoor church. That could be the closest thing to it. I'm not saying it is church, but still, that community in hunting and doing some sort of get together ritual per se, like be such a good way to serve with the church in a way as well.
Absolutely. And for hunters who, tend to be much more isolationist in terms of how they want to be hunting or what have you, that's okay when you're out on the hunt.
Yeah.
But in terms of being part of a community, you simply have to be part of a community. If you want to see your way of life either protected or promoted or maintained, you cannot do it by yourself. Even if you choose to be completely and totally off the grid, outside of any real community, you are not protecting or promoting your way of life. You are allowing everybody else to have an opinion and a sway in legislature, in community development. And if your voice is not part of that, you are entirely at the whims of everybody else. And that's not a good place to be. And as Christians, we're not called to isolate out of society. We're called to build back better society. I heard somebody say that once. I like that term. Build back better. He couldn't remember the rest of his speech, but...
That's right.
We have now broken past the awkward walls. We are sitting down as brothers in Christ enjoying a cigar now, and we have more that we would like to discuss. And I have a question to start off this discussion. Can hunting be used as a metaphor in the Christian religion?
Well, I would say absolutely. And we can we can pull some pretty easy examples from non-Christian worldviews, religions, what have you, and we can simply point to those and say, yes and amen with Christ. And I think that's much of what we ought to do as Christians anyway, is to acknowledge things in this world that are good, true, and beautiful, very close to, and then add the final necessary ingredient of in Christ, for Christ, about Christ. And that goes for a myriad of different things. But in terms of hunting as a spiritual journey, let's call it, what goes into hunting? Before you even load up at 2 a.m. to get out into the woods, you are physically training your body for this thing that you're going to be doing for weeks, months ahead of schedule, depending on where you're going. You're planning your route, you're scouting it ahead of schedule, so that you know, physically I'm able to do this, mentally I'm able to do this. Even something as simple as getting your rifle, for those who shoot rifle, sighted in properly to make sure that you are able to do the task to the absolute best of your ability. And so with all this preparation, that is a metaphor for life. You have a goal in mind. What do? You train yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, so that you are able to do that task right and well. And if you go through and you don't train, you don't prepare yourself for whatever that journey or metaphor or end goal, let's say, is, you know what? You're going to get an hour and a half into the woods, and your legs are going to hurt. You didn't plan on, rucking 20 extra pounds on your back, and you know that there's an elk probably on the other side of the next ridge, and you're not going to be able to get to that ridge.
Can't make it, yep.
So there's preparation that's involved. And as you get better at
a lot of
these
Christians
things,
like that in their faith.
there
Can't
is.
get over to the next ridge.
There absolutely is. But as you are able to train yourself to be able to do these things, you are able to go to borrow a phrase from C.S. Lewis, farther up and farther in. And so you might find, an acceptable or a decent deer or elk one ridge in, but now that you're physically able to, mentally able to, you have ambition now that you really want to find a good one. You go to the next ridge in because you're able to now, and you want the bigger prize. Not just a satisfactory prize, but you want a good one. You want a big one.
Yep.
And now that you've been prepping for this, you've been training for this, you're just mentally engaged, that's where you find your 6-pointer, your however many.
That's right.
So I would say that, hunting as a metaphor, absolutely. You have an ambition, an end goal in mind. So before you start walking up that road, walking up that hill, you are preparing yourself for days and weeks and months beforehand. I know when I used to be more involved in evangelism on the regular, I didn't go cold turkey to a lot of these places or locations. I spent time learning, if I was in a different country, trying to learn language, trying to learn culture, but also just learning and making certain that I knew what I needed to say, knew what I needed to communicate. Things that I could control in these sorts of situations, making certain that I can actually present well. As far as what goes on outside of my control, it's outside of my control, so I don't lose a lot of time worrying about it.
Yep. That's good. I mean, hunting is definitely a metaphor, and I think people use it for a lot of different things and a lot of different reasons. I think it really resonates a lot with prior service members or vets is because of that. It is such a metaphor for life in general. It's a metaphor for the gospel, which is life. So, yeah, I think maybe it's even a redundant question, but it's something, gosh, what am I trying to say? It's important to the Christian faith to test it. Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely.
It is to challenge yourself, to push yourself, and not. You're putting yourselves in those positions of vulnerability. You're not being put in them. So you can go throughout your life, going through the mundane, the 9 to 5, the life, the meat of life. You can just be going through that and be put into challenges or difficult times or difficult situations, but willingly and knowingly putting yourself out into a difficult situation and a very vulnerable situation. I think the number one thing that gets me when I'm in the backcountry and I'm away from home for a couple of days and I'm really hunting hard and I'm tired and I'm just not getting enough food, just always hungry, it feels like, not sleeping again, is just missing home. It's missing my wife, it's missing my kids, and that is a huge mental facet that a lot of people have not thought about. They don't think about that until you're already deep in there. You're thinking, oh, I've been wanting a break for so long, this is going to be nothing. I get away from home for a couple of days, a break, and you get right until sundown and dusk hits, and you're like, man, I could go home, my wife would make me a meal, I'd see my kiddos, put them to bed. That is very difficult. That is, for me, has been the hardest thing about those long backcountry hunts, is being away from home. It's not the physical, it's not even the spiritual aspect of it. It's, mentally being vulnerable, I guess. So how does that, as a Christian, how do we look at that? How do we go about that in regards to carrying out the mission that you've set out to finish, that you've set out to accomplish? You've set out to get an animal, and either it's that important to you or it's not. But I think that also leads into Sawyer and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, is really having everything prepared at home. Yeah. You cannot leave home with a chore undone. You cannot leave home with a broken relationship with a child. You cannot leave home with an unhealthy relationship with your wife, her blessing to go out. And there are a lot of guys out there that I think just claim, I don't know, their male dominance in situations like that and just say, no, I'm going hunting. And I don't think your hunt's going to go very well. It's definitely not going to be enjoyable to be around that person. They might go out by themselves, be fine in their sin, and be out there away from their family in a total argument, leaving it open-ended. But I can guarantee you will not have an enjoyable time with that individual if that's where you are. So I guess that all just conforms around hunting being a metaphor. Mm-hmm. It really is, like you said, it really opens up my eyes to that and seeing and how many ways it could be used, so many different ways.
Yeah, there is there's great perseverance in hunting. It involves persevering to the end if you want to see the reward. Mm-hmm. Which is the harvest, of course, and bringing home the meat. Bringing home the meat to your wife. Mm-hmm. Bring your meat bags. She'll help you unload them. Yeah. But anyhow. Yeah, great perseverance and discipline learned in hunting, which is definitely metaphorical with the Christian faith and the Christian walk. Christian walk in life, for sure. Mm-hmm. my 2 bits there.
Yeah, that's good.
It's like Apostle Paul says, he beats his chest or he beats his body so that he can finish the race, so he can be, right? Is that what it's talking about? Or
Yeah,
is he?
1 Corinthians. Yep.
Yep.
I beat my body so I am, it's a slave to me and I'm not a slave to
Yeah, he's taking dominance over his physical shape or something like that. so he can
and mental.
so he can finish, so he can persevere to see the end through and get that reward. So if you don't persevere and you do give up and you go home early, you're obviously not gonna get a deer, elk, or bear, whatever you're hunting. You might get a quick meal from your wife, but that's you're done hunting there for that outing anyway.
Yeah.
Prolongs it or shortens your hunt.
Well, and the hunt as well is so, it is helpful to remind us as men to challenge yourself and to voluntarily go do hard things.
Yeah.
And hunting is voluntary. We can all go down to the local butcher shop or supermarket or what have you, even to a neighbor, and barter and get what we need to survive. Even for those who choose a more simplistic lifestyle, most of us are not going to be, the only homestead within 300 miles and you have a horse and a buggy. By and large, those days are gone. But hunting now, present day, where we live, still serves a point and a purpose of, I am voluntarily choosing to do a hard thing for a good reward. And that, I think, is absolutely important for men to have that paradigm in their minds of do hard things to get a good reward, and how important that is, and how that is, or should be, applicable across a swath of different areas of your life. Do hard things. There's a reason. It's good for you. Whatever that reward might be. The journey sometimes is almost as rewarding as your end goal, and it hardens you. It shapes you. It disciplines you.
And there's small rewards. There's small rewards throughout too. The getting the harvest, the deer, elk, antelope, whatever you're hunting, that's a great reward. But there are so many smaller rewards throughout hunting.
Oh, the small little creek you find along the way,
yeah.
little waterfalls.
Stuff you learn
incredible.
about for the next year. That's a great reward to get closer to the grand reward.
Absolutely. And think about this, especially for you boys born in, Montana. How many places have you guys found yourself in? Little draws, little switchbacks, what have you. And you've thought to yourself, I might be maybe the first person in, 100 years, 500 years to have walked in this area.
Yes,
and to realize that you are somewhere where so few people, if anyone, has ever been before. And that's just cool.
Yeah.
It's cool because a lot of those areas you find, not trying to sidetrack, but you find ancient human artifacts or human dwellings of some sort in places like that, and it is pretty stinking cool. Yeah. Anyhow.
Well, to go down that road a little bit, I've found axe heads, old hobbles, arrowheads, buffalo skulls. Man, a myriad of things I've found out there from cultures that aren't that ancient necessarily, but that there are things out there that are older than that, even, and to be out in God's creation, as Romans 1 says, it declares the glory of the Lord. Well, that his creation that we see and we partake in now was created out of his wrath. It was created out of a flood that demolished and destroyed everything on this earth, and now we see the end results of that, and this is from his wrath. I think that to me is so almost overwhelming sometimes when I'm out there, just like, wow, God created this out of his wrath. That is something. I mean, the only other thing that's more beautiful is probably the human body, and just how it's created and how it functions and how, just how it was created in general. And that goes into
Not my body.
some of our bodies, I guess. No, but just yeah, how incredible it really is to be out there. And that is where the slippery slope begins for a lot of people. I feel like they continue to soak in that soul revelation, or that only revelation of being out in his creation. This is where I feel the best. Well, you're having endorphins being dumped. There are sciences that correlate with scripture and how our body functions, and the risk versus reward that you're getting out of that, the pushing of your body, the endorphins that are being dumped in. You become addicted to that, and you start getting fixated, and you focus only on that, and you get distracted. So here we go. This is leading us back into the metaphor of hunting, right? It is a distraction as well, or can be a distraction. Yeah. The journey itself can be a distraction from the end goal.
Absolutely.
And that is where you need to be careful, but also aware, I guess.
Yeah,
Aware of the dangers.
Aware of the dangers, but also glorifying God in that, and still embracing that and rejoicing in that, and being thankful and grateful that God has given you the opportunity to do that.
That's where I'm greatly tempted, and doing it the wrong way. I could very easily just make it my God if I wasn't a Christian. It would be very easy to do so, and it's a temptation for me to do that during every hunting season comes around. I get a little too obsessed, a little too into it. I do love it, but dang, dude, it sucks me in. But yeah, the days, or the years, or the days that I have done really well at putting God first and focusing on the Lord have been my most prosperous hunts. Not saying I was doing the right thing, so God gave me this gift, but who's to say he didn't necessarily? Mm-hmm. Our goal shouldn't be to do good things just so God gives us a monster bull or buck, or any meat at all.
You can't win that game.
No. So, this goes against, moralism and prosperity gospel. Hunting has really revealed those sides of things to me. God's used it for sure to draw me closer to him in those ways. So,
but God also delights to reward his children when they are faithful. That's right. And you're right. This is not goofy, wacky prosperity gospel saying if you do good things, God gives you good things. It's not so transactional, but it's that if you are faithful, if you are righteous, if you are pursuing God, you will be blessed in your life. If you read the Old Testament, it's rife. God gave promises to his people, to the Israelites. And we understand that the Abrahamic land promises, are satisfied. They were satisfied in Joshua. I just lost half your view count, sorry. But
the title of this is going to be Hamas and Israel.
No. But even so, we see throughout Scripture that God does delight to reward his people when they are faithful.
Yeah.
So it is not transactional, because we'll never win that game. However, let us never forget God as Father. And what father does not delight to give his children good gifts?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Side note, another good way to test that if your heart is in the right place, I found going off that is when you aren't gifted the animal or the harvest, and you are still completely satisfied in God, and you're satisfied in the hunt you just did. You might be dog tired from your hunt and upset that you didn't get something, but it's like, you know what? Christ still died for my sins. This is a very minor reward. Hunting, or a gift, I guess you could say, compared to the eternal reward. So at the end of a hunt, are you still satisfied in God? Or are you tempted to be upset at God per se that you didn't get what you needed? Like, I do need meat to fill my freezer. I need to feed my family, and I trust God to provide. And I also am tempted that when I don't get something, I'm like, dang it, God, why didn't you provide for me in that? It's like, God knows what he's doing no matter what, but either way.
Yeah. No, that's really good. How to test whether you're grateful or not, I guess, really.
Yeah, if your heart's just in the right place in all things that you do.
Yep. Well, with that, we say continue to be grateful and thankful for all things.
And get out there and hunt.
Get out there and
Try it. If
hunt.
you haven't, it's never too late to try.
That's right.
Find some like-minded people who enjoy hunting and love the Lord. If you're a Christian, if you're not a Christian, find believers who love the Lord and want to go hunting and go hang out with them.
Yeah. Another thing, do your research. So you don't kill something, and then what do? There's that, and also shoot your guns. Get into guns. Guns are, they will be tools to bring us food, if we ever need. So yeah, practice that stuff. Yeah. Get into it.
Yeah, that also wraps up this podcast into being traditional skill minded. So whether that be traditional skills of theology and studying and knowing who God is, or if those are traditional skills of how to quarter and pack out an animal, whether those are whatever those traditional skills are, they're being lost in today's world. We have YouTube now that is kind of documenting some of these things and keeping them available for specifically young men that have no father, which is a big rampant thing in our country that we know of. And a lot of us haven't had the opportunity to have their dad teach them things or to teach them how to do these things. This again wraps all the way back around once more to build the community, build that community. That's why I think it's something in the next several years we will look at possibly doing a festival that is for Christians to gather in fellowship and praise God for a hunting season that's allowed. North America is the number one country in the world that allows big game hunting, and with the option of shooting multiple different animals, we live in a very unique place in the world and in time to get into this, to get into hunting with the technologies that are here, and the realization that traditional skills are being lost. And there is a push to bring those back and to control those and have those reformed once again. I think that is very important. That is what this podcast is about. And that wraps us up. And we thank you guys for joining us, Meatbags, sitting here with the preface that we are far more than bags of meat.
If you can skin a buck, you can fill a bag of meat at Meatbags Podcast.
We can workshop that.
I thought you were going to go into some Hank Williams there, string a trout line.
Going off that, I was trying to think of.
That was good.